Hi, I'm Chad Steiner, and this is Emmaus Presents. On Monday, we considered the question, what is God's name? And we drew out from the book of Exodus that the meaning of God's name forever is given to us in the specific context of his ways with his people portrayed in the Old Testament, namely his nearness to them, his in-depth knowledge of their suffering, and his decision to save them up out of their distress. So today, let's ponder a closely related question. What is God's mission? And in one sense, we've already begun to answer it. His mission is given to us in his name. It's to save his people, right? And that's obviously a significant part of it. But God has expensive tastes. He's after far more than this. On the one hand, if we think about the question from a broad, whole Bible perspective, we'll observe that the Bible makes claims about creation, about the world, about humanity and history, and that the claims the Bible makes are universal or totalizing in their scope. For example, the Bible claims that God created the world, and thus that the world is his, and that humanity, as part of that creation, exists ultimately to serve God, and that history is being brought forward intentionally by God to a culmination that serves his purposes. These are universal or totalizing claims. In an important way, they are political, in that they present a kind of ultimatum to all people and all cultures everywhere, because they lay hold of everything. They leave nothing out. But on the other hand, there's a potential danger in any universal perspective that it will squash the particular, that it'll overrun the small, the few, the weak, the very sorts of folks with whom Jesus identifies, and that their value as a result will be diminished or destroyed. With this concern in mind, Richard Bauckham explains in his wonderful little book, Bible and Mission, Christian Witness in a Postmodern World, that very often God's actions on behalf of Israel are performed not only for the benefit of Israel, but also on behalf of other nations. And he cites a number of examples. The Lord dried up the Jordan for Israel to cross so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, in Joshua 4. Or Hezekiah prays for deliverance from the Assyrian army so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, Lord, are God alone. 1 Kings 19, Isaiah 37. Or Ezekiel prophesies God's restoration of Israel after exile, not for Israel's sake, but for the sake of God's name, so that the nations may know that he is the Lord. Continuing from Bauckham, over and over again in the law and the prophets, attention is concentrated on the lowly, the poor, the weak, those with no power or influence. These are the kingdom's citizens whose particularity is protected and maintained rather than lost or discarded or simply forgotten by an economic status quo that doesn't know how to care for them. End quote. Here's where the book of Exodus once again provides a helpful development. In the first few verses of Exodus 19, we read the following story, which includes an important explanation from God toward the end. Starting in verse 1. On the third new moon, after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain, while Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. Now, at first glance, the sense of Exodus 19:5 seems fairly straightforward. If Israel hears the Lord's voice and keeps his covenant, then they will be to the Lord his possession in a way which the other peoples are not. There will be this singular nation called Israel, which does not contain people from other nations, and they will have this status as the Lord's possession that other people in other nations do not have, right? However, however, there are a few details about which we need to be aware. Number one, way back before the Exodus, before there was even Israel, there was God's man, Abraham, whom God himself selected and to whom he explained that he, God, was going to make out of Abraham a massive nation with the ultimate aim of blessing all the families of the earth. In other words, God's ultimate plan was not merely to bless Abraham and his, even though he was chosen in a special way, nor was it to bless the nation he would make out of Abraham. Rather, God's ultimate aim from the beginning was to bless everyone. Number two, after our passage in Exodus 19, God gives Moses instructions for all the people, this massive nation, Israel, that he's brought into existence from Abraham so long ago. And in those instructions, we read here and there that the instructions themselves are not only for the Israelites, but also and equally for the strangers, the aliens, the foreigners, or the sojourners, a bunch of different words that the Bible uses. Who are these people? Well, the immediate answer is that some of them are folks who came with Israel out of Egypt when God used Moses to deliver them. Others may be nomadic folk who have attached themselves to Israel during Israel's sojourn from Egypt to Sinai and from there toward the Promised Land. One thinks of Rahab and her family, also as examples of non-Israelite folk who attach themselves to God's people and receive the same blessing as a result. The long-range answer is that these folks are examples of all the families of the earth that God told Abraham he was going to bless along with Abraham and the nation that comes from him. So back to Exodus 19 now, which sits between God's promise to Abraham about all the families of the earth and, on the other side, the set of instructions Israel is about to receive from God through Moses, which includes instructions and provisions for those who are not part of Israel by birth. So let's look again at that interesting phrase in verse 5. You shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. On the face of it, the language of treasured possession seems to single out Israel from all the peoples. But God just finished bringing them up out of Egypt as his possession. No, Pharaoh, you can't have them, they're mine. What's being explained here in verse 5, though, is that Israel will become something they are not yet, namely, a treasured possession composed of all peoples, for, as if God is saying, they are all mine, because all the earth is mine. The people the Lord is addressing are to become something they are not already, as a result of hearing his voice and keeping his covenant. They haven't done this yet. The orientation of the verse is in the future. God has a goal in mind. The one whose name means, sees, hears, knows suffering, and comes down to save, has a mission. And the mission is for Israel to become more than what they already are. They are to become his possession, drawn from all the peoples, who are also in bondage from the stain of sin, even if they don't know it. As members of the others whom God has brought near, it will be well for us to bear in mind that he loves them and not just us. And he has his eye set on them and not just us. And he wants to use us to bless them and to make them us's rather than them's. So let's go forward today, keeping in mind the time before the Lord was our God, and even the moments since then when we've rejected him and then been welcomed back by him. And let's live graciously among those who are themselves before the time that the Lord is their God. I'll have a final question for us to ponder on Friday, and I'll talk to you then.